Welcome to our second class in Religion in the News. And I'm glad to see you all back for our second session. Let me mention again at the onset that this meeting is made possible by generous donation of the Fairport Baptist Homes. In addition to the homes that they run, they do a lot of good work for the senior community in our area. And we do appreciate their donation to make this presentation possible. Now, this is the second of our two class sessions that we have scheduled for this. And on the last class session that we had, I spent considerable time going over COVID-19 implications for religion. And I kind of covered most of all of that, so we will get into some other topics today. A lot of news items that happened before this COVID crisis hit the world with the pandemic. But I will start off with a little brief thing about COVID. And that has to do with the important Islamic holiday that's occurring now of Ramadan. One of the 5 pillars of Ramadan is this fast that people do during the month of Ramadan. And you can see here it says Ramadan, but it also says beneath this Kareem. It's kind of like a greeting. You know, people say Merry Christmas, or for Easter in Eastern Orthodox Christianity, they'll say, you know, what's the news? And they'll say Christ is risen. So they have particular greetings they give during Ramadan to each other. And one of the things they'll say is Kareem Ramadan, or Ramadan Kareem. Kareem means generous, because in Ramadan, in addition to fasting, it's expected that people will give donations to the poor and help them out. So they want people to be generous in their donations. Also, you'll hear people say Ramadan Mubarak, and Mubarak means blessed. So it's kind of have a blessed Ramadan. So obviously there are some COVID issues involved with Ramadan. There's people here you could see lined up to shop, and they're all spaced out 6 feet apart, social distancing. But Ramadan ends with a big holiday. It's called Eid al-Fitr. And that's where they break the fast and people are able to eat during the daylight hours. And it's a huge social gathering. And so already the Islamic authorities have said that they do not want these large social gatherings happening in May 24th when this fast gets ended. They want people to keep to these social restrictions. So people have tried to get inventive and do other types of things. And one of the things that's been going on among families, whether it's for al-Fitr or usually at the end of the day when they break the fast, they get together in smaller social gatherings, is instead they're doing card exchanges. And the children are especially involved with this in terms of making up Ramadan cards to send to relatives and friends that they would normally invite over to break the feast. So you can see this child did something where they did cats. So they did Ramadan Meow Barak. So rather than Mubarak, it's Meow Barak, which I thought was kind of interesting. And here is another couple, young couple. And one of the other things that happen to Ramadan is very often people will visit the mosque and they're not able to go to the mosque. So they built a little kind of mosque area in their home. And what this is here is a minrab. And it's an area in their home that faces Mecca. So they know where to face when they do their prayers during the day, which is also one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And that is a kind of a makeshift one that they did in their home, but it's a key part of a mosque. So I thought maybe what I would do is many people have never been in a mosque and don't know what it's like. So I thought I would show what are the different parts of a mosque and what does a mosque really consist of. Well, the key part is that part I was just talking about, called the mihrab. And it is generally in a mosque just a niche in a wall. And I'll show a picture of one that's going to come up here that's quite a fancy one, from quite a fancy mosque. And they face this niche in the mosque when they want to pray, because they know this is pointing towards the direction of Mecca, geographically. The other thing that you'll see when you enter a mosque first thing will be shoe racks. because you can't wear your shoes in a mosque. They discourage that. So there's a giant shoe racks when you walk in with these whole bunch of these different booths where you see all these shoes in there where people take off their shoes. And then you'll walk into the area and then you'll kind of say, okay, where's the mosque or where's the center of the mosque? And you're probably standing in it. It is the prayer hall, the Musalla. And it'll be fairly vacant. You're not going to see pews or chairs or anything in there. What you will see in the one kind of right-hand kind of part there is something called a minbar, which would be analogous to a pulpit in a Christian church. It's where the imam might go up into to give sermons and lectures, during services at the mosque. And generally, downstairs in the mosque, there'll be some area where people can do the ritual washing they should do before their prayers. And that's the ablution area, excuse me. And here it's quite elaborate. This is a big mosque, but in a very small mosque, it may be just a section of the washroom that's kind of set aside. Generally, you'll see some type of rugs there in the mosque where people are going to kneel down and pray. One of the reasons they came up with this system of kind of, you don't have to pray in a mosque, by the way. Muhammad set up Islam to be super user-friendly. That was kind of his goals he had in mind. He wanted to keep things simple. So he was designing Islam at the time for a lot of nomadic people that were in the area of Saudi Arabia. And there's no way that these nomadic people can go to some church. So he wanted to set it up so they could do their prayers any place they were. So he had this system of praying just towards, so that originally it was praying towards Jerusalem, and then they changed it to praying towards Mecca. And the reason they pray on a rug is the area that you're supposed to pray in should be clean. So that's the concept of laying down a rug. So if they're out in the desert, they could just lay down a rug any place there are and do their prayers and not have to worry about finding a mosque someplace. And you can see this is a humongous mosque. And the mihrab is like way, way over here. You might not be able to see it. So generally the rugs have some type of a pattern on them that are showing a direction pointing. And the rugs are set up so this is pointing towards Mecca, so they know how to kneel in prayer. So that's pretty much the interior of a mosque. Now, they might have a section off to the side where there'll be a library, and they'll have copies of the Quran or other types of scripture books for Islam. But that's pretty much the extent of a mosque. And just like churches and such, they'll have attached buildings where they'll have, cafeterias and kitchens and social areas where people can get together before and after the services. The exterior of a mosque, they could look very, very different, but key characteristics are minarets. And the word minaret in Arabic means a beacon or lighthouse, with the idea of calling people to prayer. And then you'll see some type of domes, which is the idea of the vault of heaven. And very often they're colored blue to represent heaven. So for example, in Rochester, and there's a lot of variations on this. So in Rochester, if you look at the mosque that's over at the Islamic Center on Westfall Road, there's a lot of other buildings there, but it also includes a mosque. You can see a tower here that represents a minaret. And rather than a dome on the building, they have these kind of curved windows, kind of represent abstractly the kind of dome of heaven. They just completed a gigantic mosque, brand new one. It is the largest mosque that exists over in Europe. So what country would you guess this huge, largest mosque that exists in Europe was built and exists? Think to yourself, where would this be? Well, it's Europe's largest, and it actually exists way over in Eastern Europe, in Chechnya, this area here of Russia. And all of these countries here, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, they have huge, large populations now of Muslims. The reason they have a lot of Muslim influence there is there's been so much migration happening, because this area is contiguous to some large Muslim countries and also some countries that have had considerable unrest and wars and such. So to flee the violence, many of these people have been migrating up through these areas. So Russia, in many of these provinces, has a considerable Muslim population. You can see Muslim population projections, and you can see how about now in 2020, they have about 18% of Muslims. And that's expected to grow somewhat up to 20% of Muslims. Now, when we look at Russia, there has been some trends where people have been saying that it's been getting, that's highlighting the Muslim population. 15%, excuse me. I was looking at the wrong line here when I was saying 18 and 19. That's millions. It's 13% expected to grow to 15%. Now, if you look at Russia in general, many people have commented that it is getting more religious, because when you look at some of the figures there, you can see that Orthodox Christianity is going on this big growth. If you pause for just a second, I have to turn down a speaker. I'm getting a little bit of an echo on my end. Okay, sorry about that. So you can see from 91 to 2008, this huge increase in Orthodox Christianity, and people who said they were atheists or unaffiliated have been dropping dramatically. And some observers have said that people maybe are getting more religion, and other people are saying that these people were religious all along, and many of them are, so to speak, coming out of the closet, coming out in the open, that they were afraid to admit that they were Christians before, because Russia was, under the Soviet Union, technically an atheistic state, even though they tried to tolerate religion to some extent. If you're openly religious, you didn't have much chance of advancing in the Communist Party and such. And it's not all that open in Russia now, to be honest, even under the glasnost and under Putin. Good illustration of this is, we can go back to perhaps coronavirus for a second. But Russia's had considerable problems with coronavirus. They're one of the large growth areas in the world of that. And there have been some doctors and people in the medical community that have openly criticized the government's support for that, the ability to get medical supplies, to come out with statistics. And there were 3 doctors in particular that were vocal in the press about it. And those 3 doctors mysteriously have fallen out of hospital windows. 2 of them were killed, and one of them is critically injured. So there's still a lot of repression there, and it does affect certain religious minorities, especially the Jehovah Witnesses. They're very active in missionary work around the world, and this, Russian authorities have taken a dislike to them, and they banned them. They've gone to the extent of prosecuting them under their terrorist laws. They have laws that basically say certain groups are terrorist extremists, and they've labeled Jehovah Witnesses terrorist extremists. And since the ruling, which happened, I think, was late last year in December, at least 300 members of the witnesses have been placed under investigation and facing criminal charges. They've raided over 70 homes, and generally they've been going in and seizing all the assets of the Jehovah Witnesses and turning them back into the state. Jehovah Witnesses are very active in missionary work, especially with any kind of immigrant communities. Generally, when they set up their kingdom halls, they're very small kingdom halls. Jehovah Witness kingdom halls are kind of limited in size. Once they get over 70 parishioners in a kingdom hall, they have to split and form another kingdom hall, another church, because they want to encourage very tight social interaction among the parishioners. And so they're very big on different immigrant communities, where they'll go into the Korean community or Baha'i community, And they will recruit them for Jehovah's Witnesses, and they'll encourage them to come to a kingdom hall that has a lot of people from their culture there that they can better assimilate. So one of the things that they've done is they've had Bibles in many, many different languages that they've translated for these communities. And they've recently done one in American Sign Language. And you say to yourself, why would they want to have a Bible in American Sign Language? And what it is it's a special kind of a DVD set. You could also access it online. And you click on it and they got the complete Bible there done in sign language. And you say, well, why can't the deaf people just read, the scripture? That's because sign language is not, deaf sign language isn't this one-to-one correspondence where you got a word and you got a sign. It's its own unique language. And deaf people feel that they get the meanings of things much more strongly and much more clearly when they see things signed than when sometimes they hear translations done in English. So many deaf people really have spoken highly of these type of sign language translations of the Bible, that they're getting much more and a better understanding of the scripture. And there have been some attempts to do some of this in the past with little sections of the Bible. This is the first time that people have done the entire scripture, the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Gospels, in a very, very high-tech production. Well, let's switch to a different topic. Within the news 3 times a year at the Wailing Wall in Israel, there's a special blessing done by a certain group of Orthodox Jews called the Kohanim. And they bless people in the state of Israel 3 times a year at the Wailing Wall, doing this particular prayer. And when people see the photo, the first thing people ask is, what's with the hat? Why is he wearing that huge hat? And that actually, the origins are a little bit fuzzy, but what people think that goes back to is in Russia, when the Jews were there, the Tsar had some edicts that he wanted the Jews to be more acculturated into society, and he wanted them to take on the dress more of society. And part of what they did is adopted these types of Russian hats, the Cossack hats with the fur on top. And what they're called among the Orthodox Jews is a shtreimel. And they're traditionally made of fox fur. And sometimes you'll see fox tails hanging from it. And it's something they'll wear on special occasions. Orthodox Jewish men will always keep their head covered. Very often they'll wear a fedora or some other style of hat. But for some very special religious occasion, they'll pull out these elaborate fox hats and they'll wear those. And it's a carryover from some edicts that took place in Russia many hundreds of years ago. Well, another thing that has been in the news, believe it or not, is yoga. Here's an article, How Namaste Flew Away From Us. And I've seen several articles like this recently. And it's some people from India kind of gnashing their teeth in terms of how things get co-opted and brought into Western culture. Anybody who has been to a yoga class knows at the end of the yoga class, there is this kind of traditional thing they do where the yoga instructor will come to the class and do this thing with their hands and bow down and say, Namaste, right? And the class is supposed to respond, Namaste. And this is this big spiritual end to the yoga class. And this has taken on a huge kind of a spiritual aura and momentum all its own. For example, you could go out and buy yourself a Namaste yoga mat and a workout outfit and a bag that says Namaste, and get yourself a t-shirt that looks like a marijuana leaf on there. We're in Namaste deodorant, Namaste chocolate mix, and it's become a big deal. And it's taken on quite the follow. And a lot of stuff has grown on about what does Namaste mean. So like here's a poster you could get on the meaning of Namaste. It means, I honor the place in you in which the entire universe dwells. I honor the place in you, which is of love, of truth, of light, and of peace. When you are in that place in you, and I am in that place in me, we are one. And that's just a lovely kind of definition of namaste, only if it were true, because it isn't. Another definition of it, the belief that there is a divine spark within each of us, the divine light in me bows to the divine light within you. That's often what the yoga people will think. And as I mentioned, they're beautiful thoughts, but unfortunately, it's not something that's quite accurate. Because if you went to someone from India and you showed them all those definitions and that stuff, they would say, what? What are you talking about? If you look at the word namaste, it's from an ancient Sanskrit word, namaha, that originally meant to bend, okay? Because when they would do that as a greeting to people over time. So you know, where we would wave kind of hello, they would kind of bend salutation greetings, much like you see in the Far East in China and stuff. And the word te means to you. So namaste means just bowing to you. And in India, what it means to 99.99% of the there is just a simple greeting. It means hello. So you'd say namaste to someone. Now, sometimes it's used more for someone more informal acquaintance. It's more like rather than saying hi, you would say, how do you do? Maybe you'd say that to someone that was older, you want more respect, or someone in authority or something like that. But it's just saying hello, which is kind of odd that this simple greeting of hello have taken on all these underlying religious meanings that don't exist, because we have actual greetings of hello that have religious implications that people don't seem to even know exist. Like, for example, in Spanish, when they say adios, that actually means may you be commended to God. Or when we say goodbye, that's an abbreviation of God be with you. Or in Islam, Arabic, people say inshallah, you know, if Allah wills, you know, have a good day, make things go well, inshallah, if God be willing. And instead, we've made up this big thing around namaste. And it gets to be quite crazy. Now, like over in Alabama, they had this thing where they had yoga classes for the kids in school. Kids were going nuts in school. They figured they would calm them down, right? So rather than having nap time, where they make believe they go to sleep and they don't really calm down, they said, why don't we do some yoga stuff? Settle the kids down, right? So they were doing this, and they got all upset. And they had to pass a law through the Alabama legislature banning yoga in the public schools. We can't have our kids being converted to some foreign religion by doing these yoga poses in kindergarten or wherever they were doing this kind of. But Alabama had second thoughts, where people said they were being regressive and they weren't really with it. So they modified the law. So what did they say in the modified law? They said, okay, we have a bill that's going to undo the ban on yoga in classes, but we're going to strictly prohibit you from saying namaste, because that has all these religious implications. And namaste doesn't have anything, really. It just means howdy. It's originally mentioned in many of the Hindu religious texts, the oldest religious texts that exist in the world, about 4,000 years old, the Vedas. There's 4 of them that cover different parts of different types of religious rituals and chants and such like that. It's kind of interesting because this namaste was a greeting that they gave in the Vedas to the deities when they were, you know, doing some prayer or addressing the deity. And it means hello, hi there. So it's kind of different than what we would think of in many Western religions, in Judaism or Christianity or Islam, in terms of greeting a deity. You wouldn't kind of think about saying hello there. I mean, if you're watching the movie The 10 Commandments, right? And they have the big scene where Charleston Heston all of a sudden kneels in front of the burning bush, you wouldn't picture him saying, hey, how you doing, right? He said something like that in the movie, people would think it was highly sacrilegious and they would storm the studio and burn it down. You just don't treat deities that way in Western religions, Abrahamic religions. But a very different attitude towards deities in Hinduism. For another example would be in India, they have a big festival, this Krishna festival. And part of it is they have all the children dress up and look alike contest to see who could look the most like and dress up like Lord Krishna. And they have prizes for this and the different kind of things. And, you know, this kind of thing wouldn't happen. I mean, you wouldn't see this kind of contest where children would dress up like Jesus Christ or dress up like Muhammad and they have a look-alike contest and stuff like that. It wouldn't be acceptable. And it shows you the different types of relationships that people have with their God in India versus many of the Abrahamic religions. I believe over in Penfield, I'm going to be doing a class later this year on Eastern religions, and I'll talk a bunch about that. Well, let's change topics here. One of the things that's caused considerable angst among some communities is what they say is the increasing secularization of America. People becoming unreligious, atheism growing by leaps and bounds. So here's a chart showing people that say that they are religiously unaffiliated. So they ask them, what religion do you belong to? You know, are you Christian? Are you blah, 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 Islamic? Or what are you? And they say none of the above. Don't belong to any religion, organized religion. And you see this thing growing up and up and up and up and up. And people are forecasting, if you look at this trend, it's going to go quite high. And so there are people saying that, and this headline here, millennials are slowly taking America to hell. Those in the younger generation are less likely to believe in God, pray, or attend religious services. Because when you look at that graph that is going up, a lot of that is being driven by younger generations. These people who are answering this question about religiously unaffiliated, it's very, very high. And it keeps going up and up and up with each younger generation that comes out. But it appears as though, and so if you look at the trend, people are saying close to half of Americans will not participate in organized religion if this trend keeps going forward. But it looks as though that trend might be flattening out. Here is a graph, and it's showing this green thing here is the section of people who say they're religiously unaffiliated. And here's the millennials, and then here's the next generation after that that they call Generation Z. So when they surveyed Generation Z, they expected that green part to be growing even larger, saying that even more people are religiously unaffiliated, but no, it's the same. Seems to have leveled out over here. Now, this is kind of interesting. So Generation Z is the same as the previous generation. So there have been these forecasts of how America is going to heck religiously and everyone's turning into an atheist. But other religious scholars have looked at this graph and said, well, wait a second. Here's a scholar, Dr. Bursch, who is a scientist over at Eastern Illinois University. And what he says, he's not sure this graph is really reflecting much of anything other than a fad. He's saying a lot of marginally attached Protestants and Catholics who went to church once a year used to say they were Catholic or Protestant when they were given one of these surveys. But now that there's all this publicity come out about people saying they're non-affiliated and all this other kind of stuff, it's more socially acceptable to say, I'm not religious at all. So what he's saying is, back here, there were tons of people who were going to church just on Easter and Christmas, but they would list themselves as a Christian or what have you on the survey, or Protestant or something else. Over here, there's just as many people who are going maybe just on Christmas or Easter, but they don't feel any qualms now about saying, no, I don't belong to any denominations, I'm not religious. Almost kind of like it's a fad and it's a badge of honor among the younger people. So perhaps as the headline said, America isn't going to hell in a handbasket after all from the millennials. Well, there's been some new news in terms of different options for people getting buried. Now, traditionally, people have been buried in the ground, and also there is cremation, which has been very fast growing. Matter of fact, in the United States, more people are cremated now than are buried, interred in the ground. But now we have a third option that has come up, which is composting. Yes, composting. Composting human remains. The process for composting a body was first introduced by a Seattle-based company, Recompose. A dead body is broken down through a process known as natural organic reduction. Natural organic reduction by placing the body in a reusable vessel and covering it with wood chips and aerating it, which creates an environment for microbes and essential bacteria. The body, over a span of about 30 days, is fully transformed into soil. So they do this process and they give you back an amount of compost that contains the human remains. And you could put this, perhaps they encourage you, around a favorite tree that you want to dedicate to this person, or some kind of a garden that you want to dedicate to this person. And this has been an approved method of burial in the state of Washington. Now, this has kind of moved south, and they want to get this approved in California. And when they tried to do that, boy, the compost hit the fan. The Catholic Conference, the California Catholic Conference, got involved, and they have denounced it as a very undignified way to treat the body. They've quoted saying here, "We believe the transformation of the remains would create an emotional distance rather than a reverence for them. Even cremated remains should be kept in a sacred place, such as a cemetery or church area, not scattered about." So they're fighting tooth and nail in the legislatures not to get this approved for this method of burial. Now, it's not that different, perhaps, than some other trends that have been going on in burial, because one of the other big trends in burial that's gone on within the last 20 years is the concept of what they call the green burial. And in a green burial, there's no kind of cemeteries. There's generally like a meadow or woods or something. And the body is put in some type of biodegradable container. And it's buried in the ground with the idea that it basically kind of goes back to nature. And instead of headstones, sometimes there's a little natural boulder there, and it could be inscribed with a little plaque or something with someone's name. And they have these kind of natural burial grounds. And right here in Rochester, on the east side of town, over at Whitehaven Cemetery, they have a green burial area. It's this natural meadow there that you can be buried, and there are these certain types of guidelines that you have to be in a biodegradable container. And then the graves can be marked or unmarked, but if they're marked, it has to be some kind of natural thing, and they have these kind of meadows there. Now, when it comes to recycling, a lot of ancient religions in the world and current religions are actually kind of way ahead of everybody, because a method of burial in many religions is something called excarnation, where the body is left out for vultures, jackals, wolves, or something else to feed upon the body, and that's how the remains are taken up. So that's kind of like the ultimate way of recycling things back to nature. And that's part of the religious beliefs, that the body should go back into nature and be recycled into life. One of the most famous examples of this are the Zoroastrians, the ancient religion of Persia, one of the most, some people say it's the oldest monotheistic religion in the world. Even though it's not well known, it was actually the dominant religion of the Western world for close to 400 years, centered in Persia. But they are renowned for their centers of towers of silence. They have these towers up on the hill that are open to the air, and they lay the bodies here where vultures come in and consume the bodies. And they've actually had problems with this the last decade or so, because they've been doing so much harm to the environment in these areas, killing off the vulture population. They had to take some other means to get rid of the bodies. But this isn't something unique to the Zoroastrians. There are many religions around the world that practice this type of disposing of remains, this excarnation. Besides what we've seen over in Persia, the Native American Indians in many areas did this. They would leave the bodies out for either wolves or sometimes in the trees for birds to take. In Africa, it was very common to do, to leave it out for jackals and such. In India, it was also something that was common. Up in Mongolia, especially you see this in areas in Tibet and Mongolia where things are frozen and you can't dig into the ground. It was an especially popular way of burial. You see this among Inuits as well, up in Alaska. But in warmer areas as well, down in the South Pacific, in Bali, for example, they have similar types of practices. So excarnation shocks people when they see it, but it's a fairly common way of disposing among remains among many religions around the world. I don't know if anybody ever participated in something called St. Anthony Day. And sometimes they show this on the news where people could bring their pets into the church and the priest will come out and bless your pets. St. Anthony was the patron saint of domestic animals. I can remember my mother telling me where she took her cat over there, propped up the cat there, and then this big basilica over and I grew up in Lackawanna and got the cat blessed. But there's an area in Spain where they have a particular tradition for blessing animals on St. Anthony Day, which is quite a bit more dangerous than this. What they do is they build a giant bonfire and they actually charge the animals through this bonfire as a blessing. It takes place in a particular city in Spain called San Bartolome. And the idea is when they race them through this fire, it's supposed to purify the animal and protect them from disease or misfortune throughout the year. And you can see some pictures here of doing this. I'm sure if these horses could talk, they would say, hey, can't we do something a little easier, like just blessing with holy water? And here's another picture. And the whole big thing is like, how long can you keep your horse in the flame to get the thing purified? Here's another one. Bad enough they're running this horse through it, but they put the kid on the back of the thing as well. So recently, this has come under fire from many people in the animal rights groups, and they're saying that this is a cruel ancient ritual that forces horses to run through the flames in honor of the saint. So there's a lot of pressure on this town to kind of discontinue this practice and just go back to what everybody else is doing, just blessing the animals with holy water. Another thing that's been in the news are something that you've seen a lot in religious art, cherubs. Botticelli was big on cherubs. They're kind of these androgynous things. You can't tell whether they're male and female, and these little baby-like characters. And when they had the big kind of angel craze that started up where people were having all kinds of posters and things about guardian angels, a lot of that is getting replaced by not cherubs, but a replacement for cherubs, which have been the minions. Remember that Despicable Me movie? They had these little minions running around. Well, they seem to be displacing the cherubs on all types of posters and little kind of figurines and little Christmas ornaments and such. And you can see here, I just grabbed a couple of things from the internet. These were posters. They have these things, God gives his hardest battles to the strongest soldiers. God has no phone. I talk to him. He's still my friend. I have Twitter. I still follow him. And you can see all different types of things. And people have said, well, actually, this is somewhat like cherubs in that they are androgynous. You can't tell whether they're male or female. And they're kind of there to serve people. And they're kind of like these happy characters. But they're kind of different than cherubs. And they also have this kind of mischievous side. Almost maybe like Cupid would be mischievous. So here's an example of, I try to wear my angel wings every day, but sometimes I like to take them off and beat somebody with them. So they're cherubs with an edge. One of the things that's been in the news ever since they've had the recent presidential election is some confusion and puzzlement by many scholars over the support of evangelicals for Donald Trump. White evangelicals was the group that elected Donald Trump. They was clearly the group that pushed them over the top in many of the states. Something like close to 90% of evangelicals, white evangelicals, voted for Donald Trump, and they turned out extraordinary numbers at the polls. I mean, close to 90% of them showed up at the polls. And it was just a massive force that really pushed him over the top. And this has puzzled religious, and you can see how strong the support is. Wasn't even at the election. I mean, here are approval ratings among evangelical Protestants, all right? And you could see among all Americans, Trump's approval ratings are down here, and among the white evangelical Protestants, you're talking about what, 30 points, over 30 points higher for white evangelicals. So the support has been staying in there among the white evangelicals. And this has puzzled religious scholars, because traditionally when they looked at the white evangelicals and even how they portray themselves, it has been a big thing about the moral majority and pushing family values, high standards of morality, and those aren't the types of things that generally Trump was associated with. And it seems odd that the support has been so high. And many scholars are wondering why this isn't causing kind of like a massive amount of what they refer to as cognitive dissonance, where you have two opposing things in your mind. You know, why are you supporting this candidate if you feel these values are so strong, and in the past you only supported candidates who could pass these high benchmarks on, you know, morality and family values and all this other kind of stuff? Why is this happening? So it's an example of cognitive dissonance, and it's very much a puzzlement for scholars and even psychologists as well. Traditionally, when you look at this kind of cognitive dissonance, where you have some inconsistency between their beliefs and high moral standards and actions, you know, unwavering support for Trump, it causes this dissonance that has to be resolved. And the resolution comes from changing your action. Okay, not supporting Trump anymore. Well, they've hung in there with him. Or changing your beliefs and saying somehow, oh, you know, we don't believe in those moral things anymore. Or maybe changing your perception of these things. So some people have come up with different explanations for all this. And they said, well, what's happened is, you know, they've actually changed their beliefs. They no longer have these high moral standards, and people have mocked them, saying they're kind of hypocrites. Here's a book that came out that called them the immoral majority. You know, they were kind of phony, saying that they actually believed in all these moral things. They never really did. And some people say, well, no, they do, but what they've done is they've changed their kind of perception of their moral beliefs. And they said some are more important than others. So this is like an extreme example of a single issue voters, where they feel the abortion issue is the most important moral belief they have, and everything else should be subservient to that. And that's why they're kind of supporting Trump to get these changes on the Supreme Court. But there's been some recent scholarship on this that's been very interesting. And they've gone back to something to understand this, which seems a little odd, but it makes sense once you look at it. And they went back to a UFO religion called the Seekers. Now, this was a group that existed back in the 1950s. And the leader of the group forecasted that the world would end in a great flood before dawn on December 21st, 1954. And when I've done classes before on religious sects and cults, I speak extensively about what were called UFO religions. And there were quite a large number of them in the 50s and 60s, and even today they exist as well. Generally, these religions have a belief in this kind of coming catastrophe, where the world is going to come to an end. And rather than the four horsemen of the apocalypse coming in, or some rapture where everyone's coming up to heaven, the way it gets resolved is these creatures from another planet, beings from another planet, come down and rescue everyone. They either fix everything on the earth or they transport everybody back to another planet. And there was this group called the Seekers. And they had this belief, and they believed when this flood happens on December 21st, 1954, these UFOs were going to come down and then rescue them and fix things or take them away. Well, there was a team of psychologists that learned about this particular religious group, and they thought this was a great opportunity to do psychology study. So they put in people infiltrated into the groups Okay, they had moles into the group to do observation. And they observed what happened when they got to December 21st at midnight, that this was supposed to occur. And they got, they watched them, observed them in the group to see what their reaction was, what happened afterwards when the world didn't come to an end. And they wrote a very, very famous book, landmark study, that was called When Prophecy Fails. Some people call it When Evidence Fails. And actually in this book, they actually coined the term for the first time, cognitive dissonance, to explain this phenomenon. And what they found in this study, when they had this declaration and all of a sudden it didn't come true, that if the believer is a member of a group is of convinced persons who can support one another, they won't abandon their beliefs just because of empirical evidence. So what happens is, even though you can get objective evidence in front of you that says something isn't true, the social connection in the group, if you're there, is so important to maintain that social connection, you will reject that factual evidence to keep the social connection of the group alive. So when they got together in a group and they said, okay, the world didn't come to an end, what do? It's like, 4 hours past midnight. They, as a group, modified their belief to make things come true. So someone would say, oh, we must have been praying so hard that the people from the UFOs spared us and spared the world. And they would say, yeah. And they kept on with the belief system. And what's interesting is when you look at white evangelicals, what some people have pointed out, going back to this study, is there's this high degree of social interaction. High degree of social interaction when they have their services, but also outside the church. They tend to hang out in their social circles with other white evangelicals, even do business with other white evangelicals. I'm sure you've seen ads in the paper where people advertise this is a Christian business or such. Because when they did this study of UFO people, what they found was when they saw people in these groups and they were getting together and the prophecy didn't come true, they were able to shift their beliefs and kind of keep on with the religion. But when people were by themselves and they saw the prophecy didn't come true, they were very quickly jettisoning that religion. They thought this stuff was a bunch of baloney. It was never true. They quit the groups. So it made a huge difference whether these people were in a group together or by themselves when they had this conflicting evidence on whether they believed it or not. So what people have looked at and said, well, wait a second, all these white evangelicals who have been hanging in there supporting Trump, they have not been able to get together as a group. They've been stay-at-home orders. They haven't been able to go to church. They haven't been able to get into social gatherings with others. And what's interesting is for the very first time, if you look at what's happening while there has been this social distancing, if you look at the poll ratings and favorability in the month of April, when there's been the social distancing, for the first time we've seen these pretty good, significant drops in the favorability ratings among the white evangelicals, 11 points. And some scholars have said, well, this is interesting because this maybe matches this theory from this landmark study that happened with this other grouping. Once they're isolated from the group, then the cognitive dissonance really takes hold and you wind up changing your belief systems. Well, let's change places here. They have a big Welcome to Spring festival in Japan that happens right after their New Year celebration. And you can see there's a big procession here with the Buddhist monks, and they lead them out. And after they have the procession, the other big festival and thing that happens during this ceremony is people all get together and they start throwing beans at each other. Big bean throwing contest. So what's that all about? Well, when the Japanese have their New Year's in the beliefs for Shintoism, Buddhism, the New Year's is a very significant time in the Asian religions because it's a time when all of the different spiritual forces come out of heaven and then come back down to earth and everything kind of merges, kind of a sacred time. But in addition to all of the deities coming from heaven, also spirits from the underworld can come over to the earth as well. So after the New Year's is over and this auspicious time is over, all the deities are supposed to go back, but some of the evil spirits from the underworld decide to stick around and make trouble in this world. So the idea is you're going to throw beans at these bad spirits that are there to chase them back into the underworld. So they have a lot of different ceremonies. Here's one with the children. And they all got these different beans, handfuls of beans, and here's one of these evil spirits. And they're ready to kind of throw all these beans at the evil spirit and chase him back into the underworld. The other tradition on this particular festival called Mamimaki is that you eat beans as well, and they're traditionally soybeans. And the idea is you eat the number of beans equal to your age, and that will give you good luck and good health throughout the entire year. Another festival that happened over in India recently was something called the Madhav Narayan festival. And you see these fellows here, and they look like they got these big goofy hats on. They're not really hats. They're actually these things that are resting on poles. They're kind of just resting it on their head. And what they are bundles of straw that have been soaked in water. They're thoroughly soaked in water. And so when anybody comes by, what they do is they take these bundles of straw and they shake it at them, and they splash them with these droplets of water. And they especially do this for any ladies that are coming by. All the women come by to get splashed with water from these big bundles of straw. And the reason that they do this in this particular festival, it is for the married women that come there, and if they get splashed with water, it helps them pray for a long life for their husbands. And if you're unmarried, you get to pray for a suitable groom. And you get blessed with both those regards if you get splashed with this water. Here's a whole bunch of them getting splashed with that water. Here's a picture over in India of a street vendor. And you see many street vendors in India selling huge bunches of flowers, marigolds generally. And they're selling these marigolds because marigolds are used a lot in very festive types of decorations in India, and they're very important for that. For example, when Hindu couples get married, there is like a canopy they get married under called a Mandap. And it could be made a lot of different ways, but here's a Mandap. It's made entirely of marigold flowers, all decorated up in marigold flowers. And the other way that you'll see these marigold flowers is for a recent celebration they had was Diwali, the Festival of Lights. It's a festival where it involves the goddess Lakshmi, who comes down and does a special blessing to people's homes. So to invite them to come into your home, usually you make some greeting at your door. And the greeting very often is done in a display of marigold flowers. And so this would be in someone's doorstep or on their porch, they would do this. And here's another display. Some people get shocked when they see these types of symbols in India. This is a swastika because they associate this with Nazism. But actually, this is one of the oldest religious symbols in the world. It goes back to 4,000, 5,000 years old. The word swastika, even though it kind of sounds German, isn't German at all. The word swastika is a Sanskrit word. It means prosperity and good luck. And it's been used in ancient Indian religions and ancient Chinese religions, and it's actually spread. They found this symbol in South America, the tip of South America, among some of the Inca religions as well. And it's used very much by a lot of religions. It was co-opted by the Nazis in the 1940s, and it's gotten a bad reputation, obviously, in some areas. Where I grew up in Buffalo, in the city hall there, they had like an Art Deco city hall that was built in the 20s. And the roof, they had like a special ornamental roof there, and they had symbols there from the Native American tribes in the areas. And they had swastika symbols there because the Native American tribes in this area used the swastika as well. It spread. Because a lot of Native American religions, you have to remember, they were influenced by Asian religions. People came over the land bridge into this area. So a lot of that spread. So there's a lot of commonality actually between Native American religions and some of the Far East religions. At any rate, they had these symbols up in the ceiling of the town hall, and at one point they had some people there and they were scraping off these swastika symbols, saying this was a symbol of Nazism, and then the Native Americans in the area got extremely upset and said that's a sacred symbol to them. Why are you scraping off our sacred religious symbols? But when you see this in other religions, you shouldn't be shocked because it has nothing to do with Nazism. It is an ancient symbol. And generally within India, it means prosperity and good luck. It can mean other things in other religions. Also in India, over in Calcutta, here is Mother Teresa's tomb. And here it shows it how it normally doesn't look like this. Normally it'll be decorated, and they decorate it in much the fashion that is done in India, where they'll make the different flower designs on it with marigolds. And they'll put different sayings on there to inspire people. So here's her grave decorated with the marigold flower saying, "Love begins at home." Here's another decoration. Does it say nothing, only Jesus? Love until it hurts. And in the anniversary of her birthday, generally they decorate happy birthday and they have a birthday cake and all this other types of stuff. So you can see how over in India, the nuns there have kind of acculturated some of the Indian practices into the way that they have Mother Teresa's tomb. Another fun festival that recently took place over in India while we're there is something called the Dahi Handi. And you can see these people watching. And there's this fellow there, and he's busting almost like a piñata, but it is this big thing, and it contains usually some type of a yogurt or a milk product. It's kind of curded and together. And the idea is he's got to go and he's got to bust this thing and break it open to release this milk products. And this is based upon an ancient Hindu legend about Krishna. That when Krishna was a baby, he just loved butter. Kid could not get enough butter. So they thought the kid was having too much butter, so they would hide the butter urn from him. And no matter where they would hide this butter urn, Krishna was such a clever child, he would always find it and be able to get at the butter. So this is the idea of them getting at the butter like Lord Krishna. Now, what's a little bit deceptive is it seems like this fellow is standing there and breaking this kind of piñata thing, but actually it's something much more than that. He's standing on top of a huge tower of people to see how high they can get to get up there and break the butter urn and get at the butter like Krishna. And they have contests with these different teams during this particular religious festival to see who can make the tallest team in terms of a ladder of people to get up there to get at the butter urn. And they can get very, very, very large teams and very, very big competitions doing this. Kind of a fun religious festival they have there in India. They have many, many different types of religious festivals in India. If there's kind of like a party time religion, it's Hinduism. They were really into their fun festivals. Here's a picture over in, and this is the picture of the very first gay pride march they were ever able to have in Poland. And if you look at this, he's holding up a very famous icon called Hadagera, and very popular in Eastern Orthodoxy. But you'll see for the halos around it, they put these kind of a rainbow symbol of gay pride. And the reason they're carrying this in particular is they're kind of coming out because there's been support recently among the Catholic Church for gays, based upon a quote when Pope Francis was asked about this. And he said this thing, if someone is gay and he searches for the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge? We shouldn't marginalize people for this. They must be integrated into society. But That's quite a change from what the beliefs were formally, especially over in Poland. If you look at the historical church's opposition to homosexuality, and you have Pope John Paul, who was from Poland. You know, he stated all Catholics are obliged to oppose the legal recognition of homosexual unions, and the clear, emphatic opposition is a duty. And he said this in a letter issued by then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who we mentioned became Pope Benedict. And there's still a lot of historic opposition, no matter what Pope Francis has said on this, because even I showed you this little close-up shot of the parade in Poland. What I didn't show you was, in order to have that parade, they were surrounded by a cordon of police with police helicopters, and even with all the security, they were continually pelted with rocks and bottles and bricks and all types of things, because there is still strong societal disregard for homosexuals, and a lot of that was propagated by the church. Now, last week, I talked a bunch about Pope Francis and Pope Emeritus Benedict, and the fact that Pope Benedict seemed to be interfering with Pope Francis's agenda. And I quoted a journalist that had that phrase that, you know, I smell a rat, and it was Ratzinger. And I apologize for that, because that was a low blow to Benedict. It wasn't appropriate to say. And if you look at this, I mean, you could argue, you know, whether or not Benedict has a right to be interfering as next pope with the current pope's agenda. But setting that argument aside, if you step back and look at the bigger question, you can ask yourself, well, what is the best for the future of the Catholic Church? Who's right in their position in terms of Benedict wanting to preserve tradition and Francis saying change is good? What is the best thing for the future of the church? And where most people would say, you know, on the onset or on the face of things, oh, it's Francis with his agenda of, you know, being more tolerant for divorced couples and getting women more involved, perhaps as deacon and possibly priest, and allowing priests to marry and other types of things. Other people would push back and say, no, that's not a good idea. And what is their thinking when they push back on all of that? Kind of goes way back, 60 years ago, to what was known as Vatican II. Now, in early Christianity, they would have these huge church councils to settle things up about what Christianity was all about, the concepts of the Trinity and all these other types of things. And in the first millennia of Christianity, there were a large number of these church councils, but then they stopped having them for many, many, many centuries. And then in the 1800s, the 19th century, they had the church council for the first one in a long time. It's called Vatican I. And in there, they came up with this idea of papal infallibility plus some other things. But then they came up with this concept of Vatican II. And that was initiated by Pope John the 23rd. And he got this idea in 1959. And his idea, to quote him, was he wants to bring the church up to date. So he called this other huge council together. And it's a big thing because they call in all the bishops. It isn't just a college of cardinals. And there's like 2,000 of these bishops, plus all these other people they call in. So it is quite to do. So it took years to plan for it, so they weren't able to really start it until 1962, and he was in Pope at that point. It was Pope Paul at that point. But it made a series of different changes in the Catholic Church. And here's a chart that summarizes some of the things. Like before Vatican II, the Mass was exclusively in Latin. But after Vatican II, Mass was in whatever the local language was, English, Spanish, whatever it was. And also, before Vatican II, there was this big separation between church and your outside church world. That the church was this perfect thing that should be kept kind of pristine. Where after Vatican II, they wanted the church to be sort of more broadly with community things. So the idea was have more like church outreach into the community, church picnics, softball leagues, all this kind of stuff. Also, women had a very limited role before Vatican II, and they tried to increase that role of lay people. So you see these parish councils and all these other types of things where they had kind of ways to run and have a voice within the church. And where religious services were seen as a very solemn kind of formal type of a thing before Vatican II, they lightened things up a lot. You know, where the priest could tell a joke or someone could come in with a folk guitar and play some things. And also they were very insular, and they did a big thing to try to reach out to more ecumenical type things, to other types of religions and do common types of things. Now this seems like all good things to do, but what caused a lot of angst among Catholics is, even though you saw the number of Catholics increasing, a lot of these increase in Catholics has to do with the fact that Catholicism exists heavily in areas of the world where the populations are growing, among Hispanics, Latin Americans, all these other areas. And a lot of this is due to population growth and also immigration from those areas into the United States. If you look at other kind of core things like the number of priests, kind of after Vatican II, they really, really went down. Or if you look at things like the number of Catholic high schools, they've closed. Half of them aren't around anymore after Vatican II. And I showed a chart last time about church attendance. And you could see kind of like, you know, before Vatican II, you had like 70% of people going to church. And after Vatican II, it just started dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping. And many people say this was the fault of Vatican II. And other people have argued back, no, there's underlying cultural changes that have happened that started here and just increased, and that's why all these changes were happening. And to this day, there's a lot of argument on to what extent Vatican II precipitated versus mitigated a lot of these changes and declines that were happening. And you say, well, what kind of argument are they making that Vatican II was so bad? Well, when you think about people leaving a religion, now, United States is kind of unique in the world in that many more people in the United States will switch religious affiliation than people switch in other countries. About 44% of US adults have switched religious affiliation at some time. So when you think about somebody leaving a religion, like for example, Catholicism, you would say, well, someone gets all mad about a particular issue. You know, oh, I think there should be women priests, and they don't have women, so I'm walking. Or I think they, you know, I don't like their attitude towards abortion, so I'm leaving. And there are some people who will leave like a Catholic faith or any religion because of this kind of an issue thing, but a lot of people leave it for other reasons that really aren't planned defections like that. I mean, what'll happen is someone will get married, and maybe the woman's Catholic and the guy is something else, and then the woman winds up going to the guy's church on an occasion for something, all right. Or perhaps they have children and say, well, let's split time, and they'll go to the Catholic church in this time. Or maybe you move into a new neighborhood. You got a new home, and the Catholic thing is way across town, and there's another church that's closer, and you don't have time to get to the Catholic church. So one particular Sunday, you decide to go over to the Methodist church or something like that. And then what happens is this person gets into this other church, the Catholic gets into some other Protestant church, and they say, you know something? It doesn't seem all that different from my Catholic church. You know, where was Latin before? They're speaking English now. They're speaking English here. And, you know, they got the guy doing the folk guitar in the Catholic church, but over here, you know, they got a folk guitar. They got like a band, a little rock band that's playing, you know. And my Catholic priest maybe throws a joke out once in a while. Over here, they've got funny videos they're playing, right? And the argument is that when Catholicism made all of these changes under Vatican II, they kind of lost their differentiation with Protestantism. They got too close to it, right? And it made it much, much easier for people to jump ship. They lost their differentiation. So when you look at changes under Vatican II, and now are people saying, if you look at what Pope Francis is doing, he's moving us even closer to what Protestantism is. We're going to lose further differentiation, and it's going to have even more people leave the Catholic faith, because there's just not going to be that much difference between what a Catholic is and what a Protestant is when people look on the face of it. So, not that clear a question about what is best for the future of the Catholic Church. Whether preserving tradition is the way to go to keep the church's differentiation, or Francis, because you can make the logical argument from Francis' standpoint as well that, hey, priests are the gas that makes Catholicism go. If we don't have priests, we don't have Catholicism, and we're running out of priests. And unless I do some of these measures to bring in deacons and married priests and all this other kind of stuff, we're not going to have the priests we need to run the faith. Last time I was speaking about the Sikhs, and I was talking about the way they feed all of these people. Somebody asked me during the talk about how many Sikhs there were in the United States, and I didn't know the number offhand. So I thought I would show that today. There are Sikh communities in over 50 countries in the world. Even Iceland has Sikhs, 100 Sikhs there. And they go to a lot of countries because they like to do this community outreach thing. They think they should have a presence there. But if you look at the Sikhs worldwide, I mean, there's a little over 22 million of them. 90% of them exist over in India. So since this was part of the British Empire, as you would guess, many of different things that were associated with the British Empire have a lot of Sikhs in them. Canada has a huge population, United Kingdom, the United States, and then Australia. And there's many other countries beneath this. And, part of the reason is this kind of a link with the British, and also a lot of the Sikhs speak English over in India. So it's easier for them to migrate into these English-speaking countries. In their headquarters in India, they have their main Gurdwara, their main temple. And it's called the Sikh Golden Temple. And it was built by some of their initial gurus. And it sits on a large lake fed by a underground stream. And it sits on kind of an island there. And there's a long 200-foot marble causeway going out to it. And it's covered in gold leaf. It's quite spectacular. Guru Nanak, when he founded the religion, there's a story about he wanted to recruit his initial kind of priest, leaders of the religion. So he went up to a group of people and there was a tent. And I said, I need a brave individual to come forth to sacrifice himself and see if he has the courage to defend himself and to defend injustice in the world. And he had an executioner standing next to him with his big sword. So somebody volunteered, and they walked with the executioner into this tent, and they closed the tent, and they heard this big shoo of the sword, and they heard this slicing sound, and like something hitting the ground, like someone's head was chopped off. And Guru Nanak came again. He said, I want a second volunteer. And there was silence, but somebody raised their hand. And he brought them back into the tent, and they heard this shoo. They heard another head hit the ground. They did this 5 times. And finally, Guru Nanak comes out after the 5th individual went in there, and he pulls back the flap of the tent, and they see there's 5 watermelons that have been sliced in half. And the people who volunteered are there fine. And he said they wanted to test their courage to see if they had enough courage to fight injustice in the world. And he presents them with the 5 symbols of the Sikh. They don't cut their hair, so there's a turban, and there's a comb they use to put in their hair, and a bangle they wear around their wrist. And then kind of a pair of breeches they wear, and then a small dagger that they have. So the Sikhs, because of this, there seem to be very courageous people, and Guru Nanak did not want them pushed around early on because he knew they'd be a minority. So they became very strong warriors. And there's a tradition of them being volunteer troops in the British Army. And they've been some of the most courageous, most decorated troops within the British Army. So their temple is located over in Amritsar, India. And they had a big celebration of the 550th anniversary of Guru Nanak. And you can see Prince Charles attended this in honor of the Sikh service that they did in the British military through many years. And you can see there's bare feet. They don't wear shoes in the Sikh temple, and they cover their heads. But the temple itself is spectacular. there was an incident, unfortunately, that took place under the governorship of Indira Gandhi, where there were a lot of Sikhs that wanted to form their own state. And they felt that they were insurgents, and they felt that they were terrorists, and the government felt that they were hiding in the Sikh temple. And the army raided this temple at one of their largest religious celebrations, and they went in there and they wound up killing close to 600 Sikhs. Many of them were just innocent pilgrims. And this upset the Sikhs very, very much. And as a result, Indira Gandhi was killed by two of her Sikh bodyguards. And so they tried to have revenge and go back and get more people at this temple, and they assassinated the head of the army after that. But since then, there's been uneasy kind of relations between the Sikhs and the Indians. That many people, the Hindus, regard the Sikhs as terrorists. And the Sikhs basically say they're trying to defend themselves. And the raid on their temple was just uncalled for. I mean, it would be analogous to if you had government troops storm the Vatican and go into St. Peter's during Christmas service and shoot the place up. And that's how they view what happened to their people. In Venezuela, there was a celebration done there. And you can see this woman, she's a Madeira, just kind of like a witch doctor. And she's blowing smoke on this individual standing underneath a waterfall. And what this is one of the fastest growing religions that exist in Venezuela, the Maria Leonza religion. Close to 30 to 40% of the population participates in it. And it has to do with an ancient legend of the indigenous natives there, that there was a young girl born to a tribal chief, Maria Leonza, and she was fair-skinned, quite beautiful. And the chief was worried that the anaconda god would swallow her up when she saw this great beauty. So he hid her on a mountain with all of these guards and said, you're permitted from going near the water, because that's where the god anaconda was. Well, one day the guards fell asleep and she went to the water to get a drink, and she looked down into the pool, and sure enough, the god anaconda saw her and swallowed her up. And she promised that she needed to be released, so the god anaconda let her go, but had her absorbed into the mountain. She became one with the mountain and her spirits in the mountain. And the belief is that they have these ceremonies that if you sit under the waterfalls in the mountains, you will gather up the spirit of Maria Leonza and have her power, and you'll have healing properties. You could become a healer. And the religion actually is a combination of Catholicism along with Santeria, which is a native religion of Cuba, where they combine Yoruba religious beliefs with Catholicism, and then the indigenous religions that existed there. And Santeria, it's somewhat like voodoo, because it has a lot of commonalities with voodoo and Haiti, which is a combination of these West African Yoruba religions with the indigenous religions and Catholicism all mixed together. So they do this ceremony where they bless these healers and they point these people as healers, and they have these healing ceremonies. Here's a person on the ground looking to be healed. And you can see it looks somewhat like voodoo, because again, there's a lot of similarities between the two. And here's a large number of people on the ground ready to be healed. And these special healers that have been blessed in the mountains. Now, what's interesting is all of these people who are acting as the healers and all of this, they consider themselves to be loyal Catholics. In South America, it's also common in Africa as well, you have many syncretic religions where they practice Catholicism, but they combine with it perhaps different things in African religions, different things in indigenous beliefs, and different things even in Marxist political movements. And they combine all these together in a religion, and they'd have no problem kind of reconciling this all together. So maybe 30 to 40% of the population of Venezuela avidly practice this religion, Maria Leona, but they also consider themselves to be loyal Catholics. And one of the reasons that perhaps Pope Francis is so kind of broad-minded in his views is this is his backyard. And he kind of grew up in an area where there was this kind of tolerance for a lot of different beliefs. Many people, analysts feel that's one of the things that contribute to his more liberal views on how to run things within the Catholic Church. Well, I'm kind of way over on my time, but I want to conclude there, and I want to thank you very much for listening to these two seminars about religion in the news. And perhaps we have a couple of minutes left to answer some questions if anybody wants to ask anything.
I'm unmuting everyone right now. So if you have a question and you see you're unmuted, go ahead and speak it out.
Great presentation, though.
Questions at all? I think everybody is unmuted at this point. If you're nervous,
I'm just saying, you said you were having a hard time getting a one put in, so there's no one right now.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
I understand that, Dan, but all I'm saying is right now there's no one. So you said you were having a problem with one, so go inside it right now. It's 225. So go in there and see if you can.
if you have a question, please know that we can hear you. Yeah. I think that probably concludes. It looks like no one has a question, but thank you so much. It was an excellent presentation.
Yes, we like it very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Excellent.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Very
There's one.
Very simple. It should be a big nothing.
Everybody enjoy your day today.
Okay.
You too.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Jack.